Hi, I'm Dave Paulides. This is Missing 411 for the Canam Missing Project. We're at Rampart Range Road and Highway 67, about 45 miles southwest of Denver. We're in an area of the Pike National Forest known for motorcycle and ATV riding today. But in 1981, it was the site of the disappearance of Maurice Dametz. He and his friend David McSherry traveled here from Longmont and Boulder, Colorado, and they arrived on a Wednesday morning. They came here to look for topaz. The interesting part about this story is Doc Dametz disappeared that day, and this is his story. They arrived at this location, and it's run by the U.S. Forest Service. And as they came to this location, they traveled 16 miles down the road. The location high up on this map, they went down to this point called Topaz Point. Topaz Point, known as a location where people go to collect gems and minerals. Well, Doc Dametz, he wasn't a healthy man at 80 plus years old. He had bad knees, he had a blood disorder, and he was severely disabled. And David was his partner, and David would help him get into the location where they'd look for the minerals, and they'd usually split up during the day. Well, Doc had an interesting background in that he went to the University of Denver where he got a degree in theology. He then went on to become the pastor of a Presbyterian church in Littleton, Colorado, and head and dean of Rockmont College in northern Colorado. He had a strong religious background, and at 80 plus years old, he was still a traveling pastor at the time. They traveled up Rampart Range Road 16 miles until they got to an area at Topaz Point. This is a region that's just below an area called Devil's Head. Today there's a lookout there, but back 16, 18 years ago, it was a working lookout, fire lookout for the entire region around Denver, Colorado Springs, and the area west of the Front Range. Today, it's still called Devil's Head, and that's the area we're going to travel to where the pair got out of their car in search for minerals. Let's travel down the road together, and I'll show you what the topography in the area looks like. Okay, we're at about 8,600 feet now, just below the Devil's Lookout here, where Dametz and McSherry were en route to the camp where they exited their car in search for topaz. We found this spot and we wanted to show you the vista behind me. Far off in the distance, you're looking north, is Rocky Mountain National Park. And just to my south and to the east is Denver. But you can see that behind me there's a lot of rocky areas here. Below the lookout here, there's tons and tons of boulder fields and massive rock structures. It really makes the landscape look gorgeous. But on that April 29th, 1981 date, McSherry and Dametz were driving down this road. It probably was a cold day in the fall, and the road was just recently open. Rampart Range Road is closed in the winter except to snowmobile traffic. Nowadays, during the summer months, motorcycle, ATV, it's very, very popular. Driving up the road today, we saw hundreds of motorcycles, ATVs throughout the road. And imagine that day in the fall that there probably wasn't that much vehicular traffic, especially on the Wednesday that they came up. It was in between seasons, a bit cool, not a lot of traffic. And in fact, at the point where they called for help, there wasn't a lot of help on the road to be found. So we're going to continue down the road a little bit more, get to the Virgin Baths picnic grounds where they stopped, and show you that terrain. But for just a second here, look behind me and enjoy the landscape. It was April 29th, 1981, 10 o'clock, when Doc Dametz and David McSherry arrived here. At the time, it was called the Virgin Baths Picnic Area. And they arrived, they decided to come to the east side of the roadway and they were going to go off the road about 50 yards, and they were going to search for topaz. They stayed in this area until about noon. When the men got back together, they had lunch, and they then decided to cross the roadway over to their parked car and start working the west side of the road. Now this is where things go astray a little bit. They worked together until about 3:15, 3:20. They were about 50 yards down the hillside, and we'll take you to that approximate location. So we're on the west side of the hill at this point. It's about 1 o'clock in the afternoon on April 29th, and both McSherry and Dametz decide that they're going to go a little bit down the hill. Now you got to remember that Doc Dametz is a disabled man. He's got really bad knees, got that blood condition, and McSherry's there to help him into a location. So the doc is wearing overalls, boots, a shirt, and a white cap, and he's carrying a cloth bag with garden tools. Garden tools are going to help him work the hillside, look for the topaz. And when they went down the hillside, McSherry helped him into a location. They split up about 50 yards apart. I'm going to go down the hillside. I'm going to show you the location now. So we're about 50 yards down the western bank along Rampart Range Road at Virgin Baths. And this is going to be the approximate location where David McSweeney set up Doc Dametz to look for topaz. And this is what the pits look like that they work in. They're not very large. And when they look for quartz and the smoky quartz and the topaz, they're looking for a specific type of mineral. And sometimes you have to dig for hours. And that's what Dametz did. He stayed here for most of the afternoon. McSweeney came to check on him at 3:25 p.m. He was fine. He walked back another 50 yards. He came back 15 minutes later. Dametz was gone. And not only was he gone, but the bag that he was carrying with all of his garden tools were gone. And there was no blood. There was no disruption of the soil outside the pit. There was no hair in the area. There was no clothing found. There was nothing. He was completely gone. McSweeney was immediately puzzled and couldn't believe that Doc made it up the hill by himself, but he went back to the car to check. He wasn't there. He honked the horn several times. He didn't get a response. He waited about a half an hour, 45 minutes, walked up and down this hillside, couldn't find him. Well, he eventually flagged down a person told to call the Douglas County Sheriff, and later that night, after 7:30, the first sheriff arrived, Deputy Allison. And he did the same thing David did. He searched the area. He looked for evidence of something disrupted, disturbed. He couldn't find it. So he called the Arapahoe County Search and Rescue, and they responded with canines and a search team. The first search dog got here at about 11:30 at night, and that started a 5-day event that was one of the most thorough searches in this area. And it was at that point that during that 5-day era that Search and Rescue said they did everything they could. They couldn't find any evidence that Doc was ever in this area other than his pit was disrupted. Well, at that point, the Douglas County Sheriff told Mrs. Dametz in Longmont that they couldn't do anymore. Well, months later, Mrs. Dametz wrote a letter to Governor Lamb, the governor of Colorado at the time. And that letter stated her own feelings. And in fact, I'm going to let you hear what the letter said.
July 18th, 1981. Dear Governor Lamb, on April 29th, 1981, my husband, Reverend Maurice G. Dametz, age 84, and a close friend of ours were rock hunting in the Devil's Head area of Pike National Forest when they became separated and my husband apparently became lost. There was an extensive 5-day search conducted which resulted in no clues as to his whereabouts, and as of this date, he is still missing with no new information. Many notices of his disappearance with pictures, description, and reward offered for information leading to finding him were posted throughout the region, but they have brought no results whatsoever. Relatives, friends, his hunting partner, my daughter, and I have been in contact with the Sheriff Department of Douglas County, and we have talked with Stan Bush and Tom Fiore, search leaders. We feel the Sheriff Department does not have the time or the resources to do a more intensive investigation than they have already done. Since the search was very thorough, we must consider that while separated from his partner, Maurice might have met with foul play or have been carried out of the area. Therefore, I am writing to you asking you to appoint some government agency or department to do something on our behalf. We feel that perhaps there is some agency or department that we are unaware of that could make a more extensive investigation. Any assistance you will be able to give us will be deeply appreciated by myself, my family, and our many, many friends. Anxiously awaiting your reply, I am, sincerely yours, Mrs. Maurice G. Dametz.
So I think there was one major point in Mrs. Dametz's letter that can't go without some emphasis. And she said there was the possibility that her husband was carried out of here. Carried out of here by who or what? And the important point being is that Mrs. Dametz knew her husband wasn't going to walk out of here. That letter was heartbreaking, and it was to the point. The point being is that something highly unusual happened to Doc here. And it wasn't an animal attack. Search and rescue in the sheriff's office determined that couldn't have been it. Again, there was no blood in the area, there was no clothing. McSweeney was only 50 yards away. He never heard any calls for help, he never heard any yelling, screaming, nothing. And you got to remember that the bag of tools that Doc was with, they weren't here either. So everything's gone. And Doc had really bad knees. He's not going to run from the area. He's not even going to get up and walk from the area anywhere. And this area was completely searched by grids for days. They found nothing. So the mystery behind this is, where did Doc Dametz go? How did he get out of this area? Because this is a steep hillside. And what would have been the intent to take him? He was an old man, over 80 years old. They said at the time he had no more than $10 on him. It's been over 30 years since this event happened. There is a cluster of missing people in this area. And this is one of those mysteries that will live forever probably, because they'll never find his remains at this point. So again, I'm Dave Paulides. This is Missing 4-1, and this is the Doc Dametz story.